Hi, guys. Welcome to the show. I want to introduce my very first guest for my very first episode. I am so excited. This is Nikki McDonald. I actually know Nikki personally, so I am so honored to have you as my first guest. Nikki, how are you?
I'm great. How are you, Justine?
I am great. I'm so excited about your story. Now, I don't know anything about it. You have never shared this with me. The only thing that you have shared is what I put in the description about your near death experience and your story. So, if you want to just start by telling us a little bit about yourself, and then we can jump into your experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Nikki, like you mentioned. I'm 27 and I am born and raised here in Nashville, Tennessee, where we're at right now. So to kind of preface the whole situation, for my entire life, I suffered from a terminal lung disease called cystic fibrosis. And when I was 21, my lungs actually decided to fail. Um,
Wow.
and basically, when I say fail, I mean my lung capacity dropped to about 12%, where it should be, up in the A's to 100. And I just had so much scarring in my lungs and infections that they told me, I needed to get a lung transplant that year, or, we were looking at, you know, essentially death. Um, and so that's kind of where this whole story starts.
So, before we get into your experience, how was it living with this terminal illness? So, when did you get diagnosed? Well, you said you got diagnosed at 21, right? Did you have any symptoms beforehand? Was life difficult before because of this?
Well, I actually was diagnosed with cystic fibrosis at birth,
Oh, okay.
but I wasn't told that I needed the lung transplant until I was 21.
Okay, sorry, that could my brain got a little
No,
confused. I
yeah.
got you. So you were okay. So how was growing up with that illness?
I I think I would definitely say I had a pretty normal childhood. My parents and my sister worked really hard at making sure that I felt included and I did all the activities that the other kids were doing. I played sports. And my disease never really was to the extent that, I was being held back extensively at all. I would be put in the hospital once, maybe twice per year for different types of lung infections. Um, and so, cystic fibrosis is a progressive disease, meaning you can be born with it and show basically no symptoms. And then after a while, it all, boils down to a point where you're really sick, as time goes on. So, I really didn't start feeling the effects of my chronic illness until I was about 14. And at that point, my mom had to pull me out of school just because I was missing so much class and, I couldn't keep up. And so, we decided to homeschool. And that was kind of the turning point for my life as a child with an illness. Um, was just, at that point, it was that realization of like, I'm different and it's not going to change.
Sorry, I had to grab him because he's running around and distracting. So let's just hold it for a minute. I'm
Hi,
totally
baby.
listening to you. Sorry, audience,
No,
for that.
yeah.
Run, look at him. This is Snorpy for anyone that wanted to know. He's interested in your experience. Now, we'll actually, you know what? I want to get into how you're doing now and your experience after the lung transplant. Before we get into that, I'd love to jump into your experience because I know that everyone's interested in near death experiences. That's why they are here. So I would absolutely love for you to tell your story.
Yeah, absolutely. So I at about 21 is when I started to become, really, really sick. I was in and out of the ICU with different lung infections, very serious ones. And it got to the point where I was oxygen dependent. So, meaning I had the oxygen tube like you see in the movies, and I was rolling around a tank with me. And I couldn't come off of that oxygen tubing just because, if I took it off, my O2 stats would plummet. I would turn blue in the face and essentially start slowly suffocating.
And
Um,
was that what and this is at, when you turned 21 this started happening?
yes, yeah, and
So it
it was
just
a pretty
accumulated over time.
yeah. But once I got to the point where I was really, really sick, it almost seemed like um, it progressed faster.
Yeah,
You know,
that makes sense.
it's yeah, it's like it all just went downhill within a year. Um, so yeah, I tried to get on the transplant list at different hospitals all around the country. Vanderbilt would not accept my case because it was too high risk. That's because I was carrying a very aggressive bacteria called Burkholderia cepacia. Um, it has a pretty high death rate, and it also has a pretty high failure rate for people who have lung transplant that carry this.
Wow.
With that being said, yeah, Vanderbilt told me I was too high risk for them, and that I needed to find another hospital to do it at.
And Vanderbilt
Um,
in Nashville, Tennessee, for anyone that, doesn't know where Vanderbilt is. So they were right here in your hometown, they wouldn't even help you. That's insane.
yeah, and I got care from them all 21 years of my life at Vanderbilt itself, and it was um, pretty devastating to know that they were going to have my back. You know, so we searched all around different hospitals. I was interviewed at different places and assessed as far as my risk level, my overall mental state, um, and then different blood work as far as like antibodies and blood types, things like that. Because there's so much stuff that goes into having a lung transplant,
Yeah.
aside from just finding good lungs. Um, there's so many variables that add into your ability to get lungs.
Yeah, and I think it's a process, right? So it's not, you know, before getting really into your experience aspect, it was probably really, really difficult. It's like, okay, they say get a lung transplant. Okay, I need to find a lung. It's not that easy. There's so many
It,
different factors. So how long would you say it took for you until you could get, your lung transplant?
yeah, so I would say from the time that they told me you need a lung transplant to the time that I actually got it was about a year and a half. And you would hope that, you know, you could just call up a hospital and they'll say, "Yeah, we'll put you on the list." But, with all those different factors of having to get tested, it takes 3 to 4 weeks just to get evaluated.
Mhm.
And you have to go through all different mental health evaluations. And then you have to interview with the entire team, and the surgeon has to interview you. It's almost like a job, interview,
That's
because
crazy.
I guess they're assessing like your willingness to cooperate.
Yeah.
It, it's crazy, but I understand it.
Yeah.
So I finally, after, let's see, I got told that I needed a transplant in January of um, 2016, or no, 2017, I'm sorry. And by November, I was finally listed.
Wow. Oh my God.
Yeah,
That's well, obviously we were so grateful that, that happened to you and that you were able to get along. Now bring me to that day that everything happened and your experience and the lung transplant and everything went down. Bring me back.
yeah. So I ended up getting my lung transplant on March 17th, 2018.
Oh.
Now, on March 2nd, I had my final clinic appointment where the doctor said I give it a couple of weeks, we're at the end of the road. I was that sick.
And had you had
Um,
the lung transplant, did you have that yet or did you have that set? Like a date to get that done yet or you still didn't think?
no, we had no idea, you know. Um, and my doctor said, if the lungs don't come, I give it about 2 weeks. and we're, facing what are our options as far as, are you going to survive? Um,
That must be
14
very
days later.
sorry, keep going. I
No, you're fine.
wanna hear what you gotta say.
14 days later, exactly 2 weeks, on March 16th, 2018, um, I got a call around 10:30 that night, and it said University of Alabama at Birmingham on the line. My heart completely dropped. Um,
Well, how scary was that? I wanna get into that real quick. How scary was it thinking that your life was going to end? What was going through your head? And when you found that when you saw that email, how did you feel then too?
I planned my own funeral.
My God.
Sorry. My pet is also with me.
It's okay, we got
Um,
pets today, guys. Pets make
well,
everything better,
he
okay? Everything better.
yeah, he knows my emotions, I guess. Um, yeah, so I in my phone, a lot of people never knew this, but in my phone, I had the details that I wanted revolving around my death. Like in my notes app, I had an entire playlist of music that I wanted to be played. It was all my favorite songs, and I wanted that to be played either on my deathbed or at my funeral. Um, I had specific instructions that I gave my best friend, um, on how to handle, my family and how to handle arrangements and what I wanted as far as, the dignity of dying and death. And,
Oh,
so knowing it could be literally any day that I either live or die
I'm listening.
was
Sorry, I'm taking notes.
definitely pretty hard. No, you're fine.
Yeah.
Was definitely pretty hard. Um, I mourned myself for for sure. I was extremely depressed. Yeah, at the same time, unbothered for some reason.
Yeah. I mean, I think when you're put in that position, when you're so close to death, it's like people want to not judge, but assume, oh, this is exactly how this is exactly how it's supposed to be. And you're supposed to feel this way. You're supposed to be scared. You're supposed to be this, but that's not necessarily the case. Everybody has a different experience, which is what's going to bring us to yours and your experience.
Yeah. And, my emotions that I was feeling, I mean, although I was extremely bummed about it, I was also at weird peace. And that kind of plays into my near death experience. Is this um, unusual sense of peace that I had, almost as if I knew exactly what was going to happen
So when did you
once
have
I
this
died.
peace feeling? Okay, so when you started having this overwhelming peace feeling, I want to hear more about that, but when did you start to feel that? Was this just more of a feeling toward when you were starting to, go through the dying process because they didn't know how much time you're going to have, or was this an actual experience? Like, did you flatline, or like how did, if you could just explain that a little more.
I think this overwhelming sense of peace that I had leading up to having my transplant, I do almost think it was part of the dying process. Because, they say, like, if you die at home on hospice or something, a lot of people are at peace just because it's not traumatic, like you're in a hospital and you flatlined and, you know, all this crazy stuff that involves passing away at at some kind of medical facility. Um, because there aren't people sitting there, working on you. You're kind of just in your own element at home. And so I do think that was a direct result of my body almost preparing myself.
And do you know how many people, I don't, there's so many near death experience stories, people that are watching this. This probably sounds very familiar to you if you are familiar with NDEs. A lot of
Mhm.
times people think you have to, example, like have flatlined, or if you have to, your heart has to have stopped to have an experience. And what I have done through my research and a lot of the things that I've read and watched, that's not necessarily the case. You can have this experience anytime. Especially, I've seen so many people that, don't necessarily die, but end up in a coma or end up in the process of dying. Like you said, on hospice, their heart hasn't stopped. They're not fully gone, but they have the overwhelming peace because you are more connected to the other side than the average person during that time. So
Ab absolutely. Yeah. And, I follow this hospice nurse on TikTok, and, I'm always so interested in her videos because she talks about, the state of the human body on hospice and that in the beginning of the dying phase. And they're always like in a trance. Um, so I personally feel like they're having their near death experience, or, you know, they're starting to connect with the other side or whatever they believe to be the other side, even while, you know, still having the pulse and sitting there breathing.
well,
Just because I think there's such a spiritual aspect of dying too.
no, it's so true. My grandpa, he was on hospice, and I didn't personally witness this. To be open and honest, I'm very honest with everyone. I used to be an atheist. I never walked around saying it. I didn't know I was. It was just I had no belief in anything at all. So my grandpa was on hospice, and so I wasn't open to hearing and seeing the things that my mom experienced too. I had a lot of faith, and just would would just say things like, "Oh, I'm feeling so and so," like his brother that had passed. All the
Mhm.
people that had passed, he was just talking about how he felt them with him. And think about it, he's connecting to the other side, even though he's not dead, but he's dying. And I think that that sounds exactly like what happened to you. Now, would you say that anything specific happened, like a story, or it was just a feeling of peace? Did you see anything, or if you could describe it a little more?
So, leading up to my transplant, I always had it, I would say it in the couple weeks leading up to the transplant, which I didn't know obviously that a transplant was going to happen.
Yeah.
Um, I would always have these very vivid dreams of um, being in this space, and I could never figure out what this space was, but um, either a family member that was still alive, like my mother or sister, would be in the dream telling me that, everything's gonna be okay and that God is with me. And it was almost every single night that I would have these dreams and it felt so real. And I mean, I do remember even a couple dreams where I was talking to Jesus. Um, I've always been religious in my life and I believe, Jesus Christ is the Son of God. And I never felt more connected to God as I did in those dreams. It was almost like he was speaking to me.
Premonition.
Um, Premonition, yeah. Letting me know that the situation was in his hands and he's guiding me to this healthy body that I so craved. Um, so I would definitely say my dreams kind of played a part in this
Yeah.
spiritual connection that I had leading up to the near death experience itself.
You hear so many people saying that about these premonitions, and you know and another thing too that I like to say is not everybody watching this obviously is Christian. I'm
Yeah.
not religious, I'm spiritual, but I do believe in Jesus as well. I guess I don't know. I'm not a very religious person, but I do believe. I don't really know. I'm still figuring that out. I'm still on my spiritual journey, guys. So nobody judge me. I'm
Mhm.
still trying to figure it out. But I do think that there are people that are going to watch us that are not Christian, and I think it's important for you to understand that everyone's experience is different. And this is just my belief. I believe God shows you what you're used to, what you believe, what you
Mhm.
are accustomed to. So you believe in Jesus, and I believe that He showed you in that way. I believe that if someone maybe
Absolutely.
show you in that way. This is just my belief, it's
Yeah.
just my belief, but I think that, there are people watching that may be like, oh, but, I'm not Christian, so how can this be real? And I think everyone has to have an open mind that God is can do so many incredible things and show you so many things. So,
Absolutely, and I mean, other people may find comfort in other ways, that could also play into their spiritual connection to this near-death experience, you
yeah.
know, whether it be God or, um, just believing honestly, it can be yourself, so.
Now, in these dreams, what did you see? Did you see? Did you hear? Did you smell? Was it a dream or was it a vivid dream that is different than a dream? I mean, there's so many different types of ways this could go. You know what I mean? So, how
Yeah.
would you describe it?
So, um, to kind of I don't wanna go back in the timeline, but I feel like it's important to say, earlier in the year, I had actually been put into, a medically induced coma for 24 hours, because I was having trouble waking up from a surgery in my lungs that was caused by all the various complications. Um, and so, you know, I don't know if it's a universal experience, but I could hear a lot of things around me while I was in my coma. And I was having vivid dreams then too, except they weren't pleasant like they were close to my transplant time. I was having these dreams about suffocation. And I'm pretty sure, you know, it was related to the fact that I had a breathing tube in,
Yeah.
and I technically was choking on it. And so I would always have these dreams over and over again. It felt like it lasted for ages. I mean, days or even weeks, where I would be just out living my life normally, and then all of a sudden I couldn't breathe, and I was desperately searching for my oxygen tank.
Yeah.
And I could never find my oxygen tank, and I just remember suffocating and it just being hot and, it just seemed like there was no end in sight. And this took place, in multiple different locations within my, you know, memories, you know, I had one when I was in my hometown and my childhood home and just different locations. And so I always had little bits and pieces of that in my dreams from that point on. And so leading up to the transplant, it would almost be like the dreams wanted to start out in that same context of like you're suffocating, you're dying, you're not going to find help. And then it would just cut to just black peace.
Wow.
And
And it's a
it's
feeling that,
like, mhm, it's
and it's
like
different than a
God.
dream, right? Like, sorry, I don't want to cut you off. I just want to kind
No,
of
yeah.
make it clear in the sense of that a dream is foggy and it's fuzzy. And would you say it was a foggy, fuzzy dream? And or was it like a vivid feeling? Because I guess in dreams, I guess can you? I'm trying to think of a dream if you can feel, and I don't really think I feel too much in dreams. So, how would you say the difference is between like you going to bed tonight and dreaming versus those times?
It was almost like it was just understood.
Yeah.
So maybe I didn't actually feel things, but and I've read this about near death experiences in general, where these people feel like God was talking to them. They didn't actually hear a voice, but the words popped into their brain that
Yes.
God said this to me and he's saying this exact thing, even though I didn't hear the words or I didn't see him say it, but it was just understood that it was him and the thoughts that are in my brain was him. I
Yeah.
know that's kind of hard to or to explain, but
People say it all
so
the time with near death experiences. People say it all the time. It's unexplainable. It's just a knowing. It's more of it's just
it's a knowing.
so. Did you feel so you just knew things were going to be okay? Like, so
Yeah.
let's go back to this was all happening before the transplant. You were having these dreams, you were having these or you're having these feelings
Hmm.
in the dying process. Because think about it, before you got the help and had that surgery, you were dying, you were in the dying process.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
did you have an experience during the procedure, or was it just before? And so if you want to just take me back to now it's time to go into procedure, or now
Mhm.
it's the day of, let's break down what happened during that procedure.
Yeah. So, after I got the call, me and my mom drove down to Birmingham, which is about 3 hours away. Um, and we waited and we waited and we waited and we waited a total of 18 hours. They did not come to take me back to the surgery until 6 p.m. on March 17th. And, I had gotten the call on March 16th. So it's about 6 p.m., like 5:30 to 6. And by then, my whole family's there.
Mhm.
And the nurse comes in and to this weird, it's a weird holding room, almost like a waiting room. The nurse comes in with the stretcher. And, the part of transplant is that at any given moment from the time that they call you to the time you go to sleep, or even after you go to sleep, they could say that the transplant is canceled because something was found on the lungs, or there's some kind of variable here that's not going to be compatible with life.
So you still didn't even
Um,
know. You were like, until this is over, I don't know if this
right, right.
works.
I could have woken up, and there have been experiences in the past from other CF patients where they woke up thinking, "I got these new lungs," and it's not. Um,
It's
so she
heartbreaking.
yeah, it really is. She comes in with the stretcher and she says, "It's time to go." And I was like, "Well, is this real? Like, I mean, are they good? Do we know if they're good?" And she said, "I honestly don't know. They just said to bring you back." Um, so we're walking down this long hallway and when she had first brought the stretcher in, my stomach was in shambles. My heart was racing 1,000 beats per minute, it felt like.
Wow.
Um, and so as we're walking this long down this long hallway, I'm just thinking about every experience I've ever had in my life. It was almost like my life flashing before my eyes, but it wasn't a flash. It was almost kind of like all these memories just shoved their way to the front of my brain.
You know that's
And
a thing, right? Like a
huh?
it's like called a life review. That's almost, so is
Hmm.
that what it felt like? Did it almost feel like you reviewed your life?
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking back to, I could have done this differently. I should have stayed in school. I had graduated, but not gone homeschooling. I should have, you know, been more active in my life. I should have done more breathing treatments. You know, like I remember this time, and then when I was a kid, this happened. It really was my life in review.
Yeah.
Important things, of course. It wasn't every detail. Um, but as soon as that started happening, that happened for maybe 2 or 3 minutes, as we're still navigating through the hallways, and my family is still walking beside me. Um, we get to the point where we're walking past the family waiting room, and the nurse stops and she said, "Okay, this is where you guys are going to stay, and we're going to take her back." And, the nurse is sitting there explaining instructions to my parents, like, "We're going to give you a call every hour or so to give you an update, da da da." We're all hugging and saying goodbye. And as soon as they walked into the room and that door shut and me and the nurse continued on, I was just hearing these prayers over and over and over in my head. And it was, "God's going to guide me through this. I'm going to be okay. And I'm so thankful for this moment."
And you have
And
faith, and I believe, do you believe that the faith helped you get through this as well?
absolutely, absolutely. And, I think that's the only way I could have gotten through any of this process. Um, and so I just felt this peace. And I had noticed, when I said goodbye to my parents, my sister, my grandma, they were all pretty frantic, like, "Oh my gosh, like, we love you. It's going to be okay." And I just said, I know. Because
You
my
knew,
mom kept saying, "It's going to be okay. You're going to come out of this." And I just kept saying, "I know."
So were you afraid when you were going in, or you at that point were at peace?
At that point, I was at peace.
Wow.
And it wasn't because there was relief that, like, I'm getting my transplant now, I'm gonna be healthy. So, with this transplant being high risk, there was a 50-50 chance of me living or dying. And as soon as we got into the OR, you know, everything's going a million miles per hour. You know, I don't know if you've ever had a surgery before. I currently work in the operating room now. Um, there's a lot of stuff going on in the OR. You know, people are yelling out numbers, medication names, your name. All this information is being displayed and yelled. Everyone's moving around. They have their specific job. Everyone knows exactly what to do. And you'll hear a lot of, rustling of things going on around you. Um, so I just remember they laid me on the OR table and it was so flat and it hurt my back so badly. And I don't know, I'm sure they did give me medications to calm me down. Like usually pre-surgery, they'll give you fentanyl and Versed, which are both essentially downers. Um, but still that sense of peace was still just with me. And I remember I was laying and all the sounds around me were kind of muffled, but I still understood everything that was going on. So, one could probably say, "Oh, you just, you got those IV meds and that's what's making you feel this way." But I knew exactly what was going on. I heard the instruments in the background. I heard the monitors beeping and the people talking around me, and I heard their conversations and I understood them.
This was once you were under. So,
No, this was right before.
oh, okay.
Um, and I remember just staring up at the ceiling. They went ahead and took my gown off completely. So I'm lying there naked. And you would think one would be like, "Oh gosh, this is uncomfortable or weird," but it was almost like I was in such a natural state.
Yeah.
Um, I just remember looking up at the light above me, which was the overhead spotlight essentially for the surgeon to use. And I knew in my head that I was either going to come out with new lungs or I was going to die in surgery and not know it. That is the good thing about dying in surgery is that you're already asleep. You're not going to experience, your heart stopping or some slow, painful death when you're in surgery because you're
Yeah.
not conscious.
And when you have faith, whichever outcome it's going to be a good outcome. You're either going to live or you're going to go to a beautiful, amazing place with God. So it's like you kind of are at that well, whichever way it goes, you're going to be okay no matter what.
Yeah. And that was my exact thoughts was I'm either going to be healthy or I'm going to be pain free. And I was at this point of so be it.
Yeah.
It is what it is. And, like, I just kept saying in my head, I can't change anything that was in my past. I can't change what's going to happen next. I said, God is in the absolute most control of it. And I just remember everything being so muffled. And I felt like I wasn't in my body. And I knew in that moment it's going to be okay. Because, like I said, I'm either going to wake up with these new, beautiful, healthy lungs, or I'm going to transcend into heaven for me. And both were such beautiful, amazing outcomes that I had no, I had no, negative feeling about it or like I can't do this or whatever. It was just here I am.
That's
What's done is done. So be it. It is what it is. And I've also have it being someone that looked into near that experiences that was um another big thing is that you get that sense of it is what it is.
Yeah.
Nothing's going to change. You're in the situation, you've accepted every outcome. And it was almost like how I had in those dreams, not that a voice that I could hear was telling me these things. It was like just this understood concept that God was telling me.
Yeah, I mean, that is such God, that's such an amazing story. Now, is the last thing do you remember, did you wake up or how did that continue? Like, how did that end, that experience for you?
It just went black.
And
And
then,
then the next thing I remember, I woke up to the sound of all these sirens because the ICU room they put me in was right above the emergency room. So ambulances were, coming through. I just remember those sirens all the time. Um, that started a long process of recovery, which is a whole separate topic that I could go on about because it's
I would
just,
love to have you back
it
on
was
for that.
tough, but
Yeah, I would love
yeah.
to have you back on to maybe go over like, to go over everything because this is a lot of information for everybody. So, we can definitely, I think I want to have you back on and we could definitely dive more into that. Before we go,
Mhm.
I did want to, just tell everybody what you do. And because it's so amazing after what happened, what you do for people. So, you save people's lives now because, I mean, it's amazing.
I wish I could say I save people's lives. I definitely make people's lives better.
Yes.
There was a point where I was saving people's lives. I was doing endoscopic brain surgeries. I am a surgical technologist, and I worked in the neurosurgery unit where we did, you know, every kind of brain surgery, resecting brain tumors, and then also spine surgeries, fixing broken spines and broken necks. So that was really fun. But um, working in the hospital, I ended up witnessing an honor walk, which is essentially a person's last send off before they donate their organs.
Wow.
That person is not legally dead, but likely legally brain dead. And all the healthcare workers and family members, they line up down the hallway and they bring the patient on their stretcher into the OR where they're going to be extubating that patient and allowing their heart to stop, or whatever method they're going to use to for this person to essentially die because they were not compatible with life. um, and this man was donating his organs, and I wanted to witness it given what I had been through, 5 years ago, and I thought that I could handle it, and I couldn't.
Mhm.
And this all kinda goes back to this spiritual, um, journey that I've gone through with